Thank you so much. Thank you so much, and good evening. Thank you, Ruth Ann. I absolutely adore Ruth Ann Norton, and again, not just for the work that she does, but for the passion that she brings to the work. And so I'm incredibly humbled to be here, incredibly thankful for the work of both GHHI and for all the different organizations and leaders here. And it's interesting because while this is not the work that I do every single day, the truth is this issue impacts my work every single day. Because frankly, the work that I do mainly focuses on education and mainly focuses on assisting students not just make it to, but make it through higher education. In fact, I was talking with a friend yesterday about it when I told him I was going to come down here for the National Lead Summit. And his response to me was, "You're going to go talk to people about lead? What do you know about lead?" And I told him that anyone who focuses on a whole collection of different issues, if you aren't focusing on lead, then you're not doing your issue any justice. You can't claim to have a focus on education if you don't have a core focus on making sure that we can address this issue. You can't claim to have a focus on the environment or on housing or on criminal justice or any variety of different issues if you also don't claim that this issue is also your issue. And so first I told him, I said, first of all, anything that Ruth Ann tells me to do, I do. Anywhere she tells me to go, I will follow her anywhere. Ruth Ann's the kind of person that if she tells me, "Hey Wes, follow me, we're going to jump off a building," my question would not be why. My question would be, are we talking like a 50-foot building, a 60-foot building? But this issue and solving and addressing this issue means everything to me. Because we cannot claim to really be for our children if we're not in every way, shape, or form before our children. You know, being a Baltimore native and a Baltimore resident, I mean, this is a city that I love with all my heart. And I'm honored to see, I'm here with some of my dearest friends like Ruth Ann, but also like Dr. Wen, our health commissioner, who is just single-handedly helping to move a variety of different issues in our city. And we're just so thankful for her service, and folks like Ben Jealous and a bunch of other Baltimoreans. But I can't help but think about how this issue of lead impacts and continues to impact my city. And if you just take it back a little over a year ago when Baltimore became a front page story on every single newspaper, every single magazine, every single television headline around the country after everything that happened with Freddie Gray. And part of the thing that really burned me about everything that happened around that wasn't just the fact how tragic his death was. The thing that also really burned me was how tragic his life was. This was a young man, at his youngest ages, poisoned, involved in a class action lawsuit against the city with a full understanding of what was happening to so many, not just Freddie, but so many of the young people. A young man who never made it past 10th grade, a young man who never held a stable job for any more than 6 months, a young man who was so well known by law enforcement in the area that the police officers who arrested him knew him on a first-name basis. So the truth is that we don't have the right to mourn his death if we're not willing to do something to address the things that led to his life. We don't have the right to stand up and demand for justice in the things that caused his death if we don't have the courage to demand justice in the things that led to the life that he actually lived. That's why this work matters. Because the truth is and oftentimes this will get wrapped up in exclusive terms around policing and law enforcement, and I can be the first one to tell you that we do have to address policing and police accountability in this country. If anyone who thinks that people who are living in Guilford and Baltimore, people who live in Sandtown, Winchester, and Baltimore, if anyone believes that they are policed the same, I would ask you to just come spend an afternoon. And you will see very quickly that they are not. But I also know this. That alone will not and would not have addressed what took place that day and has taken place so many other days before and after. Because the truth is, we could sit there and wonder, well, what's going to happen to Baltimore now that we have officers who were never convicted of a crime around the death of Freddie Gray? And the bigger question that I have is, well, I think that's important. The bigger question is, what's going to happen if all we're doing is sitting around and waiting and 6 people are going to be convicted of a crime or not? As if that alone is going to solve everything. Because the truth is, and I had a friend who asked me to do this once. I was talking about police accountability and all the things we have to do, and he asked me to do something for a second. He said, Wes, next time you get to a computer, go ahead and YouTube Freddie Gray's arrest again. And immediately I started getting, I'm like, I already seen it. I've seen his arrest 1,000 times. He said, no. He said, before you get upset, do me a favor and go ahead and YouTube his arrest again. Because it's all over the internet. Him in the handcuffs being put inside the back of the van. And he said, next time you YouTube his arrest, don't look at Freddie. And don't look at the police officers. Look at everything else. Look at the homes. Look at the neighborhood that arrest took place in. Look at the fact that arrest took place at 9:17 in the morning. And how many people are just standing around? They're not on the way to work. They're not on the way to school. They're standing there with cell phones, taking pictures. If we are not able or capable or courageous enough to address the macro, we do not have the right to mourn the micro. We haven't earned that right. This work matters because fundamentally what we are saying and what we are implying is how we think about our young people. Every single one, regardless of who they were born to or where they were born or the place that their family calls home, do we have a fundamental belief and a fundamental fight to stand up for them when they might not yet be ready to stand up for themselves? Do we have that ability, regardless of administration, regardless of who's sitting in what seat, to say that regardless of who's sitting where, our goal does not change? Our goal stays strong, just as our will does. And I'm so thankful that Ruth Ann actually opened with that. You know, I remember writing on my team a note the Wednesday after the election, and I sent out a message to everybody where I basically said, listen guys, no matter how you feel this morning, and no matter where you are on this issue or in the election, the truth is this: no matter what would have happened yesterday, the need for our work would have still been there. So therefore, so will we. No matter what happened the night before, I told my team we would still have young people who we know need and deserve a champion. So therefore, we show up and we do our work. No matter how we feel, the truth is that there are families and there are young people who frankly don't care how we feel. The only thing they know is that they're relying deeply on us getting to work. And so the thing that I ask, as you're going through this process of this conference, the thing that I ask is essentially this: never let people forget who it is exactly that we're supposed to be fighting for. And so what I mean by that is this. You know, we have I was actually reading through the synopsis of recommendations, and not only is this brilliantly done, it very clearly articulates what are the policy recommendations that we need to put into place, and all these things I think are incredibly powerful and incredibly important. The thing I also know is this, is that statistics can add context, and stories promote action. Never let people forget exactly who it is that we are supposed to be fighting for. Never let people forget the humanity behind this work. You know, when I first wrote the book that Ruth Ann was talking about, The Author Wes Moore, you know, I didn't realize the way the publishing industry worked. I didn't realize that whenever you walk into a bookstore or a library or whatever, everything you see on the inside of a book, all the words, the content, the structure, all that kind of stuff, that's what the author wants to share with the world, right? Everything you see on the outside of a book, the cover, the title, the airbrushed author photos, the blurbs, all that kind of stuff, right? All that, that's what the publisher wants to share with the world. And the publisher will hold on to the rights to that for a reason, legally. They'll hold on to the rights. And it's really because they know that is their only chance to market to you, right? They are going to do whatever it takes on the outside of a book to make sure that you will pick up the book, it might look interesting, and you'll walk over to the cash register and you might even buy it, right? This is a business. I, again, did not know that. So when they call me in, they're like, Wes, we want to have a conversation with you about the book title. And I'm like, great. I thought conversation meant we would talk about it. I didn't realize conversation meant they were going to tell me what the book title was going to be, right? So prior to my conversation with them, I'm like, okay, this is great. I'm doing focus groups with friends and family. I'm getting all these ideas. And I go up to New York to have this meeting, and there's this big oak table, and I'm sitting at the table, and they're like, okay, great, Wes, you know, we'd like to have a conversation with you about the title. And I'm like, fantastic. And I cut them off, and I was like, all right, I'm glad we're going to have this conversation because there's like 6 titles that I really like. And they kind of look at each other, and they're like, okay, yeah, what are they? And I start rattling off these different title ideas, and I look at them, and I said, so y'all can go ahead and choose between any of those 6 titles because I'm good with any of them. And they look at each other, and they look at me, and they say, that's very kind of you. We think we have a better idea. And they said, what do you think about The Other Wes Moore? And I said, that might be the dumbest book title that I've ever heard in my life. No, it's true. And they're like, what don't you like about it? I was like, there's a whole bunch of things I don't like about it. I said, but let me go ahead and start with 3. All right? The first thing I said, I try to make it very clear that that story wasn't just about these 2 kids. So by putting the name inside of the title of the book, are you not completely negating that entire fact? Right? That's 1. The second thing I told them I liked about it, I said, what self-respected author do you know that puts their own name inside of a title of a book that they have written, right? No one's ever heard of the other James Baldwin or the other J.K. Rowling or the other Stephen King or whatever, right? And then the third thing I told them I like about it, I was like, listen, guys, no one knows who one Wes Moore is. So why does anybody care who the other Wes Moore is? And so when I said that to them, they kind of laughed, and they said, those are actually all really good points. And they said, the problem, though, is that you're missing the point. Because you're absolutely right. It's not about you. And it's not about him. The name is completely irrelevant. You can throw any name inside of that book title. It really doesn't matter because the truth is there are Wes Moores in every one of our communities. Every one of our homes. Every one of our neighborhoods. Young people who are literally one decision or one policy decision away from going in one direction or going in a completely different direction. Young people who every single day who are born into a society, and the way that we welcome them in is letting them know before they can even speak their first word whether or not we care about the next years of their life. The name was completely irrelevant. The name does not matter. You can throw any name inside that book title. The most important thing about the title is not the name. The most important thing about the title is the other. The fact that our society is full of others. People who might not look like us, who might not speak like us, who might live in another part of town or another part of the country, people who might come from a different family lineage, people who are 2nd and 3rd and 4th generation of housing that has been poisoning their family for generations. So much of who we are will not simply be determined by our own individual successes. It will be determined by were we willing to fight for the others. Those who need and deserve a champion, and who are simply asking for someone to be just that. That's where your work comes in. And that's frankly where your work comes in, no matter who happens to sit in what seat. Because no matter what happened 3 weeks ago, the issue still would have been there. Therefore, so will we. No matter what would have happened, we still know that there are still children in this country who by birth were already telling that your fight is going to be harder than others. What are we doing to support them, and what are we doing to make sure that the ones who are coming behind them don't necessarily have to have that same fight? I only have 2 memories of my father. First memory was when I was about 4 years old, and I have an older sister who's about 6 years older than me, and I have a younger sister who's about 13 months younger than me, and my mom, who part of the reason that I had the joy of meeting and growing to love Ruth Ann is because of my mom. And my mom had a bunch of rules in her house, but one of my mom's big rules was that men do not put their hands on women. And the reason she was so insistent on that rule, and I didn't know this until I got older, but the reason she was so insistent on that rule was because of her own past. And she always said, I will never tolerate it if I see it, and I especially will not tolerate it if I see my son putting his hands on a woman. And again, my older sister and I used to get in these fights, and not like little fights, I'm talking like real serious fights, like MMA, closed fists fights, right? And my mother, every time she would see us, she would always break us up, and no matter what was going on, it was always my fault. So she would grab us and she would pull us apart, and she would grab me, and she would be like, you do not put your hands on women, you do not put your hands on women. And I'd have to explain to her and say, but mommy, this is not a woman. This is Nikki, this is different. And my mother didn't see the difference between the two. And so one day, I'm sitting there, minding my own business, and Nikki's blowing in my face, and I tell her to stop, and she gets up and she runs away, and I get up and I catch her, and finally when I caught her, I cocked my fist back and I punched her, and as soon as I connected, I turned around and I saw my mom. So I knew it was about to get real bad real quick, right? And so I'm running in the other direction. My mom is running after me. And we lived in a small home, but basically after my baby sister was born, they had a closet that they turned into a bedroom. So in this bedroom was a crib for my baby sister and a small bed for me. And I'm looking around this room trying to find a place to hide, and there's no place to hide. And finally I just kind of sit down on the corner of the bed, and I get myself mentally prepared for what was about to happen to me. And my father walked into the room. And when he walked into the room, he sat down on the corner of the bed, and he picks me up and he put me on his lap. And he starts explaining to me what I'd done so wrong and why my job is to protect women and to never put my hands on them. And why my job is to protect my family and not to go after them. And he told me that I had to go downstairs to go apologize to my mother and to my sister, but he told me that he would come with me. And the thing that I most distinctly remember was that as we're walking down the stairs together, I'm holding on to his hand, and literally my entire hand is wrapped around his fingers. And I remember looking up at him, and he had this kind of funny way of walking when he walked downstairs, because he always stuck his chest out when he walked downstairs. So I'm like 4 years old, and I'm sticking my chest out too, because my father was everything that I wanted to be. And the only other memory that I have of him was about 6 months later when I watched him die. And as tough as I thought I had it, or as tough as I thought my sisters had it, the person who really had it toughest was my mom. Because now she was going to raise these 3 kids on her own. And in no way was this a life that she had expected, or quite frankly, the life that she prepared for. And she called up her parents, my grandparents. We stayed down here for a little while, and after a couple of years, she just couldn't do it on her own anymore. So she called up my grandparents, who were living up in the South Bronx. And she said that she needed help. And my grandfather was a minister in the South Bronx. My grandmother was a school teacher, public school teacher for 28 years in the South Bronx, and they gave her the answer that she was hoping that they would give, which is bring the kids up here and we can help out. And so my mother then moved us up to go live with them. And almost immediately, as I got up there, I found myself getting lost. And hurting people that actually love me so I could impress people that could care less about me. Picking and choosing which days were worthwhile to go to school, and by the time I was 11 years old was the first time that I felt handcuffs on my wrists. And what ended up happening later on was, through a whole series of different stuff that happened and issues I got into, when I was 13, I found out that when my mom makes threats that she's not playing, because she'd been threatening me to send me away to a military school ever since I was 8. And she would threaten me and I'd blow her off, and she would threaten me and give me brochures and I would blow her off. And then when I was 13, she was threatening me and I kept on blowing her off, and I told her I'm gonna get better, and she's like, no, you're going next week. And she packed my stuff up to send me away to this school. And as soon as I arrived at this place, and I thought she would just drive around the block a few times, and she drove to Pennsylvania. And almost immediately as we got up there, I let everyone know who would listen to me that I'm not staying here. So in the first 4 days, I ran away 5 times from this school, because they had these big black gates that surrounded the school, and they would say, if you don't like it here, there's a train station, go home anytime you want. And so every time they would turn their back, I would just take them up on their offer, right? And finally, after 5 or 6 times of trying to run away from the school, they found me in the middle of the woods at 1 o'clock in the morning, because they had actually drawn me a map on how to get to the train station. And the map was fake. They just enjoyed watching me do circles in the middle of the woods. And they wanted to see how bad I wanted to go home. And that night they got their answer. The reason I share that story is this, that nothing changed that night, because this cat and mouse game went on for months, until finally I was able to understand some of the things that my mom was talking about. And frankly, some of the things that my father was talking about when I was 4 years old. When he said, your job is to take care of your family and not to go after them. Because one thing that I started realizing there was this, is that if these people were really supposed to be my family, if the plea brothers that I was starting with, if our job was not just to make it across the finish line, but the job was to make it across the finish line together, then I knew that there was no way that I could make it without them, and there was no way that they could make it without me. That our individual success is going to mean absolutely nothing if we still have people who, frankly, by birth, don't have a shot. That our job is to take care of each other. And that's the only way that success is anything that we can either claim or strive for. What happened to me while I was there wasn't the fact that I was picked up and moved around. What happened to me while I was there wasn't the fact that I was physically transported, or I was sent to a place where people started screaming at you starting at 5:30 in the morning. What happened to me was I found myself surrounded by people. People who, by their actions and by their words and by their deeds, showed me that there was never going to be any accidents of birth that would ever limit me or that would ever define me. People who showed me by the work that they did. Many people who were fighting and advocating for me, and some of these were people who I never even met. But they woke up every morning with the hope of me. And so in essence, what they did was they taught me what it meant to be free. When we have young people who simply, by the place that they call home, is making them sick. If we have young people who by the time we have young people who by the time they are 3 and 4 and 5 years old, we've already established that they are going to be so cognitively stumbled and hampered, that their probability of contributing anything to their community is slim. That's not just a moral stain on us. That's a massive impediment about the community that we hope to live in and the type of environment that we claim to love and that we claim to serve. How we fight for the others says everything that anyone needs to know about ourselves. And whether we're willing to do everything in our power to make sure that every young person can be able to have that sense of freedom that we all enjoy. To know that they can hope and know that their hopes will not be laughed at. To know that they can dream and know that their dreams will be supported by other people besides themselves. To know that when people look at them, they can look at them with a sense of ambition and not necessarily simply with how do we avoid this larger problem. That's why your work matters. And that's why no matter who sits in one seat, your work must continue and your goal must be achieved. You know, I'll close and say one thing. I will occasionally guest co-host this show called Morning Joe that comes on MSNBC in the morning. And it's an interesting format of a show. But when we show up in the mornings, I'm assuming that Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski, who are the two hosts, they know who all the guests are going to be during the day. Everyone else, we kind of just show up, and then they give you a roster at the beginning of the show saying who all the guests are going to be for that day, right? And so I showed up one morning when I was guest co-hosting, and I saw that during the 8 o'clock hour that a gentleman named Harry Belafonte was going to be a guest. And you have to understand, Harry Belafonte was a king in my household coming up. And Harry Belafonte, it wasn't just because of his beautiful sound, and wasn't because of the fact that he was this sex symbol, and my grandmother loved his tight pants and his Caribbean background and all that kind of stuff. But my family loved Mr. Belafonte not just because of his voice, but they loved him because of his voice. They loved him because he made his voice mean something. It's difficult to understand many of the movements that have taken place over the past 50 years without understanding the role that Harry Belafonte has played in them. Very difficult to understand the civil rights movement without understanding Harry Belafonte. Very difficult to understand the anti-apartheid movement without understanding Harry Belafonte. Very difficult to understand the anti-war movement without understanding Harry Belafonte. Very difficult to understand Black Lives Matter without understanding Harry Belafonte. And so Harry Belafonte was always fascinating to me because this was a person who understood that every single time he opened his mouth, a new FBI investigation was being opened on him. And he did it anyway. And he did it over and over again. And so when everyone was around the table, they were asking questions about his performances at Radio City and his performances at Carnegie Hall and all these different things that he did. When it came my time to ask a question, I wanted to ask him a question about that. And I said to him, when some people hit a certain level of success or a certain level of celebrity, it's amazing how quiet they get. And they get quiet because they feel like it's somehow going to hurt their brand if they say something. I would say something, but I'm afraid people won't buy my sneakers. I would get involved in this issue, but I got a new movie coming out. This is a really important issue, but I'm about to get tenure. This issue, this is a serious, serious issue. But I just need more people to buy my books. So they say nothing. And they get quiet. But Mr. Belafonte never did that. So I asked him and I said, why is it that you always made it a point to fight for these issues? And he looked at me and he smiled and he said something that I won't forget. He said, because it's more fun to live that way. And then he said, some people wake up in the morning and they call their accountants. I wake up in the morning and I call Nelson Mandela. Who do you think has a more interesting life? You fight for these issues because they matter. You fight for these issues because we have far too many young people in our cities and in our communities who, frankly, from jump, have not been given a fair shot. We fight for these issues because the hope and the promise that exists in every single one of those lives, and I ask you, do not let them forget those faces. Do not let them forget those names. Do not let them forget every single picture that we see up here. Because stats will add context. These faces, they will promote action. We do it because it's the right thing to do. We do it because we believe in the hope of this country. And frankly, we do it because, as Mr. Belafonte said, it just helps us to live a more interesting life. We can get this done in 5 years. We can solve this problem. 5 years from now, we can have another gathering, and instead of an action plan, it can be a celebratory plan. The work must continue, regardless of who sits in what seat, because the truth is, as long as there is one child who, for something that they are in no way responsible for, have to deal with this issue, then we know that we wake up in the morning and we get to work. I thank you for never forgetting that. I thank you for giving up so much of the time and energy and efforts that could be placed somewhere and placing it squarely on an issue that might not affect you all directly, but affects you all directly. And I thank you for always making sure that in the work that you do, that you're fighting for the others, because it means more than you know. Bless you not just during this summit, but bless you because in 5 years, because of your work, it'll be time to celebrate. Thank you guys for your work, and thanks for your time.